I went camping alone in late September at a dispersed site beside a narrow river in a national forest. I chose that time because the crowds were gone and the bugs were dead. I wanted quiet and routine. I worked too much and slept poorly. I needed a few nights where the only decisions were simple. I packed light, drove 6 hours, and turned off the highway onto a gravel road that followed the water. The road narrowed, then ended at a pullout with room for 2 vehicles. One was already there, an older white pickup with no plates on the front and a sun-faded tarp folded in the bed. I assumed the owner was already set up farther in. The forest was open pine with low brush, easy to see through, which made it feel safe. I carried my pack to a flat spot near the river and pitched my tent with care. The ground was packed dirt with needles pressed into it. I checked for tracks out of habit. I saw boot prints near the water, fresh, deep at the heel. They went upstream and did not come back. I told myself it meant the other camper liked to walk. I set my stove on a rock, filtered water, and made food. The river was low and moved fast, the sound steady enough to mask small noises. I liked that. I cleaned up and hung my food bag in a tree, even though there were no recent bear reports. I took my time because I had nowhere else to be. As the light dropped, I noticed the pickup again through the trees. It had not moved. No other vehicles came. I expected to hear someone at some point, a cough or the scrape of a boot. I heard nothing except the river and wind. When it was dark enough to need a headlamp, I walked the edge of the clearing to check the trees. I found a second set of prints closer to my tent, lighter than before, like someone stepping carefully. It did not belong to me. I told myself it was nothing and went to bed early. I woke around midnight with the sense that something had changed. The river sounded the same, but the air felt tight. I lay still and listened. There was a faint sound on the gravel near the water, then nothing. I waited. The sound came again, slow, uneven, like a foot testing stones. It stopped. I did not move. I did not reach for my headlamp. I stayed flat and counted breaths until my chest hurt. After a while, the sound faded. I slept in short pieces until dawn. In the morning, I found new prints at the edge of my campsite. They circled once and stopped near the tree where I hung my food. The rope was still tight and the bag untouched. The prints faced my tent. I stood there longer than I should have. I told myself that people get curious. I told myself that daylight makes fear loud. I ate, broke camp slowly, then changed my mind. I did not want to leave because of nerves. I decided to move my site a little closer to the road, still within the rules, where the trees were thinner. I carried everything in 2 trips and reset my tent with the door facing the open space. The day passed without incident. I walked upstream, sat on a rock, watched leaves drift. I did not see anyone. When I returned, the pickup was still there. The tarp had been unfolded and now covered something bulky in the bed. I noticed then that the rear window was broken and taped from the inside. I cooked early and cleaned with care. I packed my food bag and hung it again. I set my headlamp within reach. I placed my keys in the same pocket every time, so I could find them without thinking. Night came colder. The moon was thin and did not help. I lay awake longer, listening. Around midnight, I heard steps again, closer this time, slow and deliberate. They moved from the roadside toward the river, then stopped. I felt the vibration through the ground before I heard the sound of fabric brushing bark. Something bumped the tree. The rope moved. The food bag swayed once, then settled. The steps retreated a few yards and stopped. I stayed still. My breath sounded too loud in my ears. Minutes passed. Then I heard the zipper of my tent slide a fraction of an inch and stop. I sat up in one motion and turned on my headlamp. The light hit empty air and the pine trunks beyond. The zipper was exactly where I had left it. I could not explain the sound. I waited with the light on until my hands stopped shaking. I did not sleep after that. At first light, I walked to the road and checked the pickup. The tarp was back in the same folded position as before. There were no fresh prints near it, but the ground was hard-packed. I made a choice to stay one more night because leaving felt like giving something permission. That afternoon, I moved my camp again, this time closer to the riverbank where the ground was rocky and prints would show. I gathered stones and cleared a small perimeter. I set my tent low and tight. I tied a length of cord with small metal clips around the lower branches nearby, so it would make noise if moved. It was not a trap. It was a warning. The night was quiet until late. When the steps came, the clips rattled once, sharp and clear. The steps froze. I held the light off. I listened. A long time passed. Then there was a sound from the road, a vehicle door opening, then closing. The engine did not start. The steps returned, faster now, careless. They stopped at the edge of the stones. A shadow blocked the river light. I turned on the headlamp and kept it steady. The beam caught a man standing a few feet away, hands down, shoulders hunched. He wore a dark jacket and a hat pulled low. His face was plain and tired. He did not move. I did not speak. I held the light on him and reached for my keys with my other hand. He backed away slowly, then turned and walked toward the road. I stayed in the tent until dawn. When I packed, I found my food bag cut open on the side away from the river. Nothing was missing. The rope had been sliced clean. I walked to the pickup. The tarp was gone. In the bed were coils of rope, a shovel, and a folded tent stained dark along one edge. The rear window tape had been peeled back. Inside the cab, on the seat, lay a stack of folded maps with circles marked in pen along the river. I left then. I drove straight to the ranger station and reported what I had seen. They took notes and asked for details. Later they called to tell me they found the man downstream at another pullout, sleeping in his truck. He had prior charges for theft and assault and a habit of following solo campers. He cut food bags to force people to leave their tents. He watched routines. He waited for nights with little moon. I do not camp alone anymore. I still go outside. I still love quiet. I choose places with people nearby and roads that see traffic. When I hear steps at night, I turn on my light and keep it on. The forest did nothing wrong. The danger was simple and human, and it went away when I named it and left. I went camping to clear my head after getting laid off. The job ended on a Tuesday morning with a short meeting and a printed packet. I drove home with my hands tied on the wheel, the radio off, thinking about rent and how long my savings would last. I did not tell anyone where I was going because I did not want advice. I wanted quiet. I chose a state forest because it was cheap and open year-round. No reservations. No check-in booth. Just land. I parked along a dirt road that split off from a two-lane highway. The road was rutted and soft from recent rain. My tires sank a little when I pulled over. There were no other cars. I checked the map one more time and shut off my phone. There was no signal anyway. That was the point. I wanted to be unreachable. I took the borrowed tent from the back seat, a pack with food, and a sleeping bag that still smelled like someone else's laundry soap. The hiking was about half a mile. The trail was faint, more a break in the brush than a real path. Wet leaves stuck to my boots. The woods were dense, but not old. Pine and oak mixed together with thick undergrowth. The ground sloped down toward a shallow creek. I could hear before I saw it. The sound was steady and dull, not loud enough to drown out anything else. I picked a flat spot near a stand of trees where the ground looked packed down. There was a fire ring made of stones. The stones were blackened. Inside there was ash. It was dry and light, not clumped. It had rained the night before. I remembered checking the forecast and watching the storm pass over my apartment window. The ash should have been dark and heavy. I told myself someone might have used it earlier that morning. People pass through all the time. I set the tent anyway. I took my time with the setup. The tent poles were stiff and unfamiliar. My fingers slipped on the wet fabric. I noticed how quiet the woods were. No birds, no insects, just the creek and the wind moving through the higher branches. I finished before dark and sat on a log to eat a granola bar. The air smelled sharp and clean, with a hint of rot from wet leaves. As the light faded, the woods seemed to close in. The trees blocked what little sky there was. I used a headlamp to gather small sticks and start fire. The flame caught fast. The ash in the ring stirred and lifted. I watched it closely, trying to see if there was any sign it had been disturbed recently. It was spread evenly, like it had been raked smooth. I told myself I was overthinking. Losing a job does that. It makes small things feel loaded. I cooked a simple meal and cleaned up before full dark. I hung my food from a branch, higher than I thought necessary. The creek kept running. The wind died. The silence pressed closer. I climbed into the tent and zipped it shut. The fabric was thin. I could see shadows move when clouds passed over the moon. Sleep did not come fast. I lay on my back, staring at the tent ceiling, listening to my own breathing. Every sound felt close. A branch snapped somewhere to my left. I waited for more. Nothing followed. I told myself animals move at night. I turned onto my side and closed my eyes. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of steps. Slow steps. Heavy. They were not the quick light taps of a deer. Each step had weight. The ground compressed. Leaves shifted and then settled. The steps moved in a wide circle around the tent. I held my breath without meaning to. The sound stopped. I exhaled slowly. The steps started again. I did not move. My heart beat hard enough that I felt it in my throat. The steps came closer, then moved away, then back again. They were steady, not rushed. Whoever it was took their time. When I shifted slightly, the fabric of the sleeping bag whispered. The steps stopped. I froze. After a long pause, they resumed, slower this time. I thought about calling out. I thought about turning on the headlamp. I did neither. I stayed still and focused on the sound. There was no coughing, no speech, no sign of another camp, just the steps and the creek. At one point, the steps came close enough that I could tell they were boots. The sound was dull and firm, not bare feet, not paws. The circle tightened. The steps stopped near the front of the tent. I could sense the presence through the thin wall. A shape blocked the faint light. I held my breath again. Time stretched. My chest burned. The shape did not move. I thought about the zipper and how loud it would be. I thought about the knife in my pack, useless under my head. I stayed still until my lungs forced me to breathe. The steps moved away. They did not retreat in a straight line. They continued the circle. After what felt like hours, they faded. I did not sleep after that. I lay awake until the light changed from black to gray. In the morning, the woods looked ordinary. Birds called. The air warmed. My body felt heavy and drained. I sat up and listened. Nothing moved nearby. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The ground around the tent was marked with boot prints, clear impressions in the soft soil. They were large, with a deep tread. They formed a loose ring around where I had slept. The prints came close to the door, about 3 feet away, then curved off. I followed them with my eyes, expecting to see where they left. There were no tracks leading away. The prints stopped as if the person had vanished or lifted straight up. I walked the area slowly, scanning the ground. I looked for signs of camp, a bag, a cigarette, but there was nothing. The creek bank was smooth and untouched. The brush was unbroken. The only disturbance was the ring of prints and my own tracks from the day before. I packed without eating. My hands shook as I rolled the tent. I kept looking over my shoulder. The woods felt different in daylight. Open, almost friendly, but the print stayed clear in my mind. I checked the fire ring one last time. The ash was disturbed now, scuffed by my boots. It told me nothing. The hike out felt longer. Every sound made me tense. When I reached the dirt road, my car was untouched. The relief came in a wave that left me weak. I drove until I had signal and then kept driving. Later, after the shock wore off, I thought through what had happened. The area was state land with no reservations. Anyone could walk in. Someone could have been watching the road, waiting for a lone camper. The ash told me they had been there recently, maybe even that night. The lack of tracks leaving made sense once I realized the ground near the creek was firmer. Prints would not hold there. The person could have stepped on rocks or followed the water until the soil hardened. What stayed with me was not the mystery. It was the patience, the slow circle, the way the steps stopped when I held my breath, as if they were listening. I did not clear my head on that trip. I learned something else instead. Being alone in the woods does not mean being alone. It just means there is no one to see what happens. I went camping to test new gear before winter, a solo trip meant to be quiet and methodical. I chose a state forest I had visited years earlier, a place with long dirt roads, spaced out campsites, and no cell service. The map showed one loop road and several spur clearings near a lake fed by runoff streams. I arrived mid-afternoon, signed a self-serve permit, and drove slowly, checking each site. Most were empty. One had a tent frame left behind, bent and half buried in leaves, which I took as a sign to keep moving. I picked a site at the far end of the loop where the road narrowed and dipped. The lake sat below the trees, dark and flat, with reeds along the edge. The ground was uneven but dry. I parked so the headlights faced the trees, unloaded, and worked through my setup in the same order I always did. Tent first, then pad, then bag. Stove on a flat rock. Food sealed and stored in the trunk. I walked the perimeter while there was still light, noting the slope, the roots, the way sound carried across the water. Everything felt still. No wind, no insects. The silence felt thick. While gathering firewood, I noticed a trail behind my site that did not appear on the map. It was narrow and pressed down, not fresh but used. It led away from the lake and deeper into the trees. I followed it a short distance until it split, then turned back. I did not want to wander too far alone. Back at camp, I made dinner and ate before dark. I cleaned everything, locked the car, and checked my headlamp. I planned to read for an hour, then sleep. As the light faded, I noticed a smell that did not belong. It was faint, like old smoke mixed with oil. I assumed it drifted from another campsite or the road. The smell came and went. I sat still and listened. The lake made soft sounds, small movements against the reeds. Far away, a branch cracked, then nothing. I told myself this was normal. Forests make noise. I went to bed early. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps on gravel. Not close, but not far. The road ran about 20 yards behind my tent. The steps were slow and spaced, then stopped. I held my breath and listened. No engine, no voices, just the night pressing in. After a minute, the steps moved again, closer this time, then stopped behind my car. I heard the soft scrape of metal, then nothing. I stayed still until my muscles cramped. Eventually the sounds faded. I slept in shallow bursts until dawn. In the morning, I found a mark on the rear bumper where something had brushed against it. The dirt was disturbed near the tires. The trunk was still locked. Nothing was missing. I told myself someone had walked by, curious, maybe looking for a sight. I made coffee and watched the lake. The smell from the night before returned briefly, stronger now, then vanished. I packed light gear and took a long walk along the shore to clear my head. I did not see anyone. When I returned, the woods felt different. The quiet was sharper. I noticed fresh footprints near my fire ring, not mine. They were heavy, deep at the heel, and led toward the trail I had seen earlier. I followed them with my eyes, then forced myself to stop. I moved my camp chair closer to the car and kept my keys in my pocket. I spent the afternoon organizing gear I did not need to organize just to stay busy. That evening, I cooked and cleaned before dark again. I locked the car. I checked my surroundings with my headlamp, even though the sun was still up. When night came, the smell returned and stayed. It clung to the air, thick and unpleasant. I lay awake, listening. Around the same time as the night before, footsteps returned. This time, they did not stop at the road. They moved straight toward my sight, slow and steady. I turned on my headlamp and aimed it through the tent wall. The fabric glowed, but I saw no shadow. The steps circled once, then stopped near the rear of the tent. I heard breathing, shallow and close. I did not move. I did not speak. After a long moment, the breathing stopped. The steps retreated, then faded. I did not sleep again. At first light, I packed everything except the tent and drove the loop road, checking other sites. At the next clearing, I found a fire pit with fresh ash and food scraps scattered around. A tarp lay folded beside a tree, stained and stiff. The smell was stronger there. I left immediately and drove to the ranger station to report what I had seen. They took my information and told me they would check the area. I returned to my site to pack the tent, my nerves tight. When I pulled in, my tent was unzipped. Inside, my sleeping bag was pulled halfway out, laid flat, as if someone had tested it. On the ground beside it lay a small notebook, damp and worn. The pages were filled with dates, times, and notes about campsites, gear, and routines. My site was listed with my arrival time and the fact that I cooked early and locked my car. The last line noted the time I went quiet the night before. I packed without stopping. I drove straight out of the forest and did not slow until I reached the highway. Days later, the ranger called to tell me they found a man living along the unofficial trail, moving between sites, watching campers, stealing when he could. He had been arrested after resisting. The smell was from the chemicals he used to clean his clothes and tools. I still camp, but never alone, and never without checking my surroundings more than once. The woods did not change. I did. I learned how thin the line is between solitude and exposure, and how easily routine can become an invitation. There were 4 of us. Bow season, early fall, when the air still held warmth during the day and turned sharp the moment the sun dipped behind a ridgeline. I was the least experienced by far. I owned a truck with decent clearance and room for gear, which was why I was invited. I told myself I wanted to learn. What I really wanted was to feel useful after a long stretch of feeling replaceable at work and forgettable everywhere else. The forest was public land, thick with timber and cut by old game trails that only showed themselves once you were already on top of them. We parked at a wide pullout that looked used but not busy. No other vehicles. The sky was clear, weather steady. Everything about the day suggested it would be simple. We hiked in with bows unstrung and packs heavy with food and layers. The ground was soft from recent rain, good for sign. Fresh tracks crossed the trail not far from the truck. Hoof prints deep and clean, edges sharp. Scats still dark. Broken brush where something large had pushed through. The mood shifted without anyone naming it. We followed. The terrain pulled us downhill and then back up again. Every time it looked like we were close to leveling out. The forest opened into another shallow draw. We moved slower than planned, stopping often to check wind and ground. I kept an eye on the light without knowing why. Time felt strange, stretched thin. By the time we realized how far we had gone, the sun was already low. The forest changed color fast. Gold drained out of the leaves and left everything gray and flat. We found a small clearing near a stand of trees that broke the wind and decided to camp rather than risk hiking out in the dark with bows and full packs. The clearing felt unused. No fire ring, no cut branches, just a slight rise with enough open ground for 4 tents set close together. We worked without rush, each of us moving with the tired focus that comes from miles underweight. I remember noticing how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, just the sound of fabric and metal and boots and dirt. We ate before full dark. Cold food, nothing cooked. The smell of food does strange things in the woods. After that, we checked gear and turned in. The temperature dropped fast once the light was gone. I lay in my tent, wearing more layers than I expected to need, listening to my own breathing and the occasional shift of someone nearby. Sometime in the night, I woke up, not fully, just enough to register a sound that did not fit into the rest of the forest. Footsteps, slow, heavy, measured. They came from beyond the edge of the clearing and moved across the far side, just outside the circle of tents. I told myself it was elk. The cadence fit if you wanted it to. 4 beats, weight behind each step. We had followed fresh sign all day. It made sense. That explanation settled my body enough that I did not sit up. Then the steps stopped, not slowed, not faded, stopped. The silence that followed felt pressed tight, like the forest itself was holding still. I could hear breathing, deep, controlled, not the snort or chuff of an animal clearing its lungs. This was air moving in and out through a narrow space, steady and deliberate. The breathing went on for a long time, long enough that my mind started counting without meaning to, long enough that my chest tightened as if the sound was inside my own tent. I stayed still, afraid that even the shift of fabric would draw attention. The steps started again, one at a time, slow. They moved past the clearing and then stopped again farther downslope. The breathing returned. The pattern repeated. Walk, stop, breathe, stillness. I did not know how long it lasted. Time does not behave the same way when you are afraid and waiting. At some point, the sound moved farther away. The forest slowly returned to itself. Insects resumed. A branch cracked in the distance. I did not sleep after that. I lay awake until the dark softened into early morning light. When I unzipped my tent, the clearing looked unchanged. Pale light filtered through the trees. The ground was damp with dew. The air smelled clean and cold. I stretched and stepped out, expecting to feel relief. I did not. My pack was gone from where I had left it. The others were still asleep. I scanned the clearing, heart starting to pound. Then I saw it. My pack stood upright against a tree about 20 yards away, set carefully at the base of the trunk, straps tucked under, top flap closed. I walked to it slowly, watching the ground as I went. There were no drag marks, no scuffed soil, no sign of teeth or claws. The fabric was intact, buckles unbroken. I checked inside. Nothing was missing. No food taken. No gear disturbed. It was as if someone had picked it up and carried it the way a person would, then placed it where it would not fall over. The ground around the tree was firm, packed with needles and roots. No clear prints. I looked back toward where the footsteps had passed during the night. The slope there was rocky, the kind of surface that does not hold shape. Whatever had walked there left nothing behind. We packed up quickly after that. Movements tight, focus narrow. No one commented on the pack. No one asked why it was there. We hiked out along a different route, keeping elevation and moving faster than we had coming in. The forest felt normal again, almost too normal, like it was trying to erase the night. Back at the truck, we loaded gear and bows and drove away without stopping. The road dust rose behind us and settled over the pullout until it looked and used again. Years later, with more time outdoors and more experience, the explanation became clear. Someone else was in that forest that night. A person who had been watching us long before we noticed the sign. Someone who moved through the woods with enough confidence to walk upright and slow in the dark. Someone curious enough to test how we would react by touching only one thing, choosing the pack that belonged to the least experienced person, the one who stood out without meaning to. The breathing makes sense when you accept that it came from lungs that knew how to stay quiet. The stopping makes sense when you understand how sound carries at night. The careful placement of the pack makes sense when you imagine hands instead of teeth. What does not sit easy is the restraint. The choice to move the pack and do nothing else. The decision to stand there in the dark and listen to 4 people sleep, then leave without being seen. We never talked about it again because naming it would have made it real. Saying elk allowed us to keep hunting. Silence allowed us to keep going back into the woods at all. I still hunt. I still camp. But I never forget that night. Not because of what happened, but because of what did not. My brother convinced me to camp with him a week before he moved out west. He said he wanted one last trip together, something simple, something we could look back on once distance set in. He picked the trail. He said it was easy. He said it like he had already walked it a dozen times. I trusted him because he was older and because I wanted the time with him more than I wanted to argue. We parked at a small gravel lot just after noon. One other car sat there, dusty and empty. The trailhead sign was weathered. The map faded enough that the lines blurred into each other. The sky was clear. The air felt dry and steady. Nothing suggested trouble. We started hiking with light packs and no rush. The trail narrowed almost right away. It twisted through mixed trees and shallow rises that blocked long views. Every bend looked like the last. My brother walked ahead with confidence that never slowed, even when the trail thinned into patches of dirt broken by roots and rock. I checked my watch more than I needed to. Time slid by faster than it should have. By late afternoon, the light changed. Shadows stretched across the ground. The trail forked without a sign. Both paths looked worn. We picked one and kept going. The forest grew steeper. The air cooled. My brother stopped checking his phone because there was no signal and no use pretending there might be. That was when we heard the first branch snap. It came from uphill, off to our right. A sharp crack, followed by the softer sound of leaves shifting. We stopped without planning to. The sound stopped too. After a moment, we moved again, so did whatever was up there. For almost an hour, the sound stayed with us. Branches snapping, weight shifting, always uphill, always parallel. It never came closer. It never fell behind. When we stopped, it stopped. When we moved, it moved. The pace matched ours too well to ignore. We tried to reason it away without saying it out loud. The slope above us was thick with deadfall. Animals move along contours. Rocks roll. Wind knocks loose limbs. None of it explained the timing. None of it explained the way the sound paused when we paused, like something was listening for us to start again. The light dropped faster than expected. The forest darkened in layers, starting at the ground and climbing up the trunks. We were no longer sure which direction would take us back. My brother slowed. His shoulders tightened. The sound uphill stayed steady, patient. We decided to stop and make camp where the ground leveled out near a cluster of trees. It was not a campsite, just a break in the slope with enough space to clear brush. The snapping sound moved farther off when we stopped, then went quiet. That silence felt heavier than the noise. We worked fast. The air cooled quickly once the sun dipped behind the ridge. I gathered wood from the edges of the clearing. Dry branches snapped easily in my hands. Everything looked right. Nothing felt right. We tried to start a fire. The flame caught and died. We tried again. Same result. There was no wind. The air was still. The wood should have burned. The flame would flare for a second, then collapse into smoke as if something pressed it flat. We checked the ground, the ring, the wood. Nothing explained it. We ate cold food and sat close to the dark, listening. The forest did not settle the way it usually does at night. No steady insect noise. No distant calls. Just space and the soft sound of our own movements. We went to sleep wearing all our layers. I lay awake longer than I wanted to admit, staring at the dark between the trees. I thought about the way the sound uphill had followed us without effort. I thought about how long it had stayed just out of sight. Sometime in the night, I woke to my brother shaking me. Not hard, just enough to pull me out of sleep. His face was pale in the low light. His mouth moved. He formed my name the way someone does when they're afraid to be heard. The sound barely there, shaped more than spoken. His voice shook. His eyes stayed fixed on the space beyond me, like he was afraid to look away. I checked my watch out of habit. The glow read 2:17 a.m. I listened. I expected to hear breathing that was not ours. Footsteps, fabric brushing close. There was nothing. The night pressed in from all sides, quiet and complete. My brother stayed tense, his body rigid, his attention locked on the dark. We did not sleep after that. We sat back to back until the light returned, watching the trees as shapes slowly gained edges. The forest looked the same as it had the day before. Ordinary, empty. In the morning, we searched the area. We circled the clearing and checked the slope above us. No footprints, no broken brush that stood out, no signs that anyone or anything had been near us. The ground was hard and dry, poor for prints. Whatever had moved there left nothing behind. We packed without talking and picked a direction that fell downhill. After an hour, the trail reappeared like it had never left. The walk back to the truck passed without sound or sign. The forest felt distant, uninterested. We drove away and did not bring it up again, not on that trip and not later. He moved out west. Time did what it always does and stretched space between us. Years later, the pieces fit together in a way they could not that night. The trail was poorly marked and crossed land used by hunters and locals who knew the terrain better than we did. Someone could have been moving above us, keeping pace out of curiosity or caution, staying uphill where sound travels down and sight lines stay broken. The snapping branches matched boots on deadfall. The stopping matched someone freezing to listen. The fire failing made sense once I learned how damp ground and cold air can kill a flame without wind. The moment at 2:17 a.m. stayed with me the longest. My brother did not hear a voice. He heard movement close enough that his mind filled in the rest. Fear does that when you are tired, lost, and aware you are not alone. What mattered was not whether someone was there at the edge of the dark. What mattered was that we felt watched for a long time and never saw who it was. That kind of attention leaves a mark. We never camped together again. It was not because of what we saw. It was because of what followed us without effort and chose to stay just out of reach. There were 3 of us on that road trip, moving without a schedule, picking turns by instinct more than plan. We had been driving forest roads all afternoon, the kind that branch and thin until pavement gives up and gravel takes over. We wanted a place that felt unused. No cell service, no other cars, just trees and dark and the sense that we were nowhere important. Near dusk, we found a clearing set back from the road. It was not marked, no sign, Just a wide break in the trees where someone had driven off years ago and stopped coming back. Grass had reclaimed most of it. The ground was flat enough for tents. We checked for trash and found none. That felt like permission. We set camp quickly. The light was already draining out of the sky, turning everything blue and gray. Our fire burned low and steady, more for comfort than heat. The air was cool, but not cold. The forest was quiet in a way that felt settled, not tense. We ate, cleaned up, and let the fire die down on its own. When the last flame folded into embers, we stirred them and spread them thin. By the time we went to sleep, the pit was dark. I fell asleep fast. The day had worn me down in a good way. My body sank into the ground and stopped asking questions. The smell woke me. Smoke. Not thick, not choking, but clear enough that it did not belong in a dream. I opened my eyes and lay still for a second, trying to place it. Our fire was out. I knew that. I had checked it myself. The smell grew sharper, edged with heat. I sat up and unzipped the tent part way. The clearing was washed in dim light from a moon hidden behind clouds. The forest beyond was black. At first, I thought the smoke might be drifting from far away, carried low through the trees. Then I saw the glow. It sat maybe 50 yards from our camp, just inside the tree line on the far side of the clearing. A fire, not scattered, not half-hidden, a perfect circle of flame, contained and even like someone had taken time with it. The flames were not high, but they were steady. The light did not flicker much. It held its shape. There were no voices, no footsteps, no movement around it. The fire made almost no sound, no crackle, no pop. It burned like a hell breath. I watched it for longer than I should have, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The angle was wrong for it to be ours. The distance was wrong. The shape was wrong. It was too clean, too deliberate. It looked tended, but there was no one tending it. I woke the others. We stood together at the edge of our camp, wrapped in jackets, staring across the clearing. The air between us and that fire felt open and exposed. The smell of smoke thickened as the breeze shifted, carrying heat that brushed my face and then slid past. We yelled toward it, not words anyone would mistake for a greeting, just noise, meant to announce that we were awake and aware. The sound broke the stillness and echoed into the trees. The fire went out, not slowly, not the way a flame starves or gutters. It vanished. One moment there was a ring of light, and the next there was nothing. No glow, no ember, no smoke rising to mark where it had been. The dark closed over the spot as if the fire had never existed. We stood frozen, our own breathing loud in our ears. The forest did not respond. No movement followed, no retreat, no approach, just absence. We did not go back to sleep. We sat with our backs close, watching the tree lean until the sky lightened and shapes returned to the world. The clearing looked harmless again, grass silvered with dew, trees standing where they had always been. In daylight, we walked to where the fire had been. The ground was bare dirt, packed and circular, like a ring used often enough to hold its shape. The stones around it were arranged carefully, each one placed to keep the fire tight. There was ash in the center, pale and fine. When I crouched and held my hand near it, warmth rose up. Not residual warmth from the day. This was fresh, the kind that sinks into your skin and lingers. We searched the area around the ring. No footprints that stood out. The soil there was hard and dry, mixed with needles and small rock. Whatever had been there left little behind. We found no trash, no food scraps, no sign of a camp beyond the fire itself. The trees nearby showed no broken branches, no scraped bark. It was as if someone had arrived, built a fire with care, and left without touching anything else. The explanation came together later, piece by piece, once the fear had settled into something quieter and more manageable. That forest road was used by people who did not want to be seen. Poachers, illegal campers, sometimes growers deeper in, people who know how to move without noise and how to kill a fire fast when attention turns their way. A fire can be smothered in seconds if you know what you are doing. A heavy canvas, a tight cover of dirt and ash, a practice motion, in the dark, at distance, It looks like the flame simply disappears. The lack of sound made sense too. A well-built fire burns clean and low. The perfect circle was not strange once I considered how often it had likely been used. The warmth in the morning fit the timeline. Someone had been there not long before I woke. Close enough that the smell reached me. Close enough that our noise sent them moving without hesitation. They did not want to be seen. They did not want contact. They wanted the dark back. What stayed with me was not the fear of what might have happened, but the clarity of that moment when the fire vanished. The certainty that we had crossed paths with someone who knew the land better than we did and chose silence over confrontation. We packed up early and left without lingering. The clearing disappeared behind us as quickly as it had appeared. On the drive out, signal returned and the world widened again. I still camp. I still take forest roads that lead nowhere. But I pay closer attention now to the spaces just beyond the firelight and to how quickly the dark can reclaim what it lends. My friends and I arrived late, close to 11 at night. The road into the campground was narrow and unlit, the kind where headlights catch dust and bugs, but not much else. The trees pressed close on both sides. We had planned better, but work ran late and traffic stretched longer than expected. By the time we reached the site, the place felt half asleep. There was only one other tent already set up. It sat near the edge of the designated area, tucked back from the fire ring. A small lantern glowed inside it, low and warm. A couple stood nearby, quiet and still, as if they had paused mid-task. We nodded to each other out of habit, the way people do when words feel unnecessary. They did not say anything. Neither did we. It felt respectful to keep it that way. We chose a spot farther away, closer to the trees on the opposite side. Gravel crunched under our boots as we unloaded gear. The air was cool and carried the smell of pine and old smoke. No wind, no distant voices, just the soft sounds of fabric and metal as we worked. The couple stayed near their tent the entire time. They did not approach the fire ring. They did not move toward a car because there was no car visible anywhere near their site. I assumed it was parked farther down the road or at a different pull-in. Some people do that to avoid headlights at night. It did not strike me as strange then. We finished setting up and turned off our lights quickly, trying not to disturb the quiet. The lantern in the other tent dimmed and then went dark. The campground settled into a stillness that felt complete. Sleep came easily. The drive had worn us down. I remember waking once during the night, rolling onto my side, listening for a moment. I heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the forest. No footsteps, no voices, no zippers. The other tent stayed where it was in my memory, a fixed point in the dark. At sunrise, the light crept in slowly, pale and cool. I unzipped the tent and stepped out, stretching stiff legs. The world felt clean and new, washed by early air. Birds moved through the trees. The fire ring sat untouched, gray with old ash. That was when I saw the other tent. It was closer, not slightly, not in a way that could be blamed on tired eyes. It sat only a few yards from ours now, well inside the space that had been empty the night before. The angle was different too, turned to face our tents instead of the trees. I stood still, letting the sight settle. My mind searched for a reason that fit. Maybe they had packed up and moved closer for warmth. Maybe I had misjudged the distance in the dark. I looked at the ground between the two spots. There were no tracks. The soil was dry and loose, a mix of dirt and pine needles that should have held marks. There were no scuffs, no drag lines, no crushed plants. The ground looked untouched, as if nothing heavy had been carried across it. The tent itself was zipped closed. No movement inside, no sound. The fabric looked the same as the night before, clean and taut, stakes set firm. We waited. Morning passed its early quiet phase. Sunlight warmed the clearing. Still, the tent did not open. No one stepped out. No gear appeared. No stove, no cooler, no chairs. Just a tent. I walked a slow circle around our site, careful not to cross into theirs. I scanned the area for a vehicle. There was none. The nearby road was empty. No tire tracks fresh enough to belong to the night before. The feeling in my chest shifted from confusion to something tighter. Not panic, more like the sense that a rule had been bent without warning. Eventually, we checked the register box near the entrance of the campground. It listed permits and names, some scribbled, some neat. The couple's name was not there, only ours and a few from earlier in the week. The absence stood out more than an unfamiliar name would have. Later that morning, a ranger passed through on a routine check. He moved with the calm pace of someone who had walked these grounds many times. He stopped near our site, looked at the empty fire ring, then glanced toward the other tent. He checked his list. He confirmed that nobody else had checked in for that site. The information was given plainly, without concern, as if it explained everything. The ranger walked over to the tent. He did not unzip it. He circled it once, looking at the stakes, the ground, the seams. He noted the lack of gear, the absence of footprints. He told us it was not uncommon for people to set up illegally, especially late at night, especially those who did not want to be seen. Some moved campsites to stay close to others, using proximity as a shield. Some left before daylight to avoid contact. He marked the tent for removal and moved on, his attention already shifting to the rest of the campground. We packed up not long after. As we loaded the car, I watched the tent one last time. It sat silent and ordinary, just fabric and poles in the sun. The fear came later, after the drive, after the details replayed without the softening edge of morning light. The couple had moved the tent while we slept. They had done it without sound, without leaving marks, without waking anyone. They had chosen our site deliberately, closing the distance while we were unaware. They had stayed inside, listening, waiting for daylight to decide their next move. There was nothing supernatural about it. No mystery that could not be traced back to human choice and intent. That knowledge did not make it easier. What unsettled me was not that they had been there, but how easily they had changed the space around us without being noticed. How quiet intention can be when it knows exactly what it wants to avoid. I still think about that morning when I wake early while camping, about how familiar shapes can shift overnight, and how silence does not always mean absence. This happened when I was a kid, and I only remember pieces of it. The way memory keeps what it wants and drops the rest. The edges are soft. The center stays sharp. It was a fishing trip with my dad and my uncle, late summer, when school was still a rumor and days felt long enough to hold anything. The lake sat far from town, reached by a road that turned to gravel and then to dirt. Trees leaned close on both sides. I remember the car slowing off and my dad guiding the tires around holes filled with dark water. The air smelled like sap and warm dust. I remember thinking the place felt bigger than it looked on the map, like it had room to hide things. We camped near the water on a small rise of packed earth. The lake stretched out flat and dark, bordered by trees that went right down to the shore. No docks, no cabins, just water and forest. During the day it felt calm. Dragonflies skimmed the surface. Fish broke the water now and then, quick flashes of silver. I remember holding the rod with both hands and feeling proud when I did not drop it. As evening came on, the light changed in a way I noticed even then. The sky dimmed fast, and the trees across the lake blended into a single dark wall. The water stopped reflecting much of anything. It became a flat surface that swallowed light instead of giving it back. We ate a simple dinner. Nothing fancy. The adults talked about the drive home and the weather. I sat close to the fire and listened. The fire popped and cracked, sending sparks up that vanished before they reached the trees. The smell of smoke mixed with the lake air and stuck to my clothes. Night settled fully. The fire burned lower. The lake turned black. Sounds carried farther than they should have. A splash on the far shore sounded close. A bird moving in the trees echoed like it was right behind us. I remember my uncle shining his flashlight across the water, the beam stretching out and breaking apart on the surface. I was tired, but not asleep yet. I lay in my sleeping bag, half watching the fire, half watching the dark beyond it. The lake felt like a presence, not just a body of water. It held the night in a way the forest did not. The sound came without warning. It rose from across the lake, long and sharp, cutting through everything else. It did not echo the way normal sounds did. It slid over the water and hit us whole. It was loud enough that my chest tightened. It carried pain and force, like something being pushed past its limit. It was not an animal sound I recognized, even then. It did not fit into the small list of noises I knew. It was not a scream I had heard from people either. It held too long. It climbed and then broke, dropping off in a way that left the air feeling empty after. The lake went still. The insects stopped. The fire cracked once and then quieted. My dad stood up so fast that the chair behind him tipped. He raised a flashlight and swept it across the water. The beam shook. It landed on the far shore and slid along the trees. Nothing moved. The sound came again, shorter this time, closer to the surface of the water. My dad's hand jerked. The flashlight slipped. I remember the splash more than anything, the small, clean sound as it hit the lake and vanished. The light went out instantly. My dad did not reach for it. He did not curse. He did not say anything at all. He just stood there, staring at the dark water where the light had been. My uncle stayed still. His body went rigid, like he had decided not to move at all. The fire burned low, throwing uneven shadows. I pulled my sleeping bag tighter around me without knowing why. The sound did not come again. The silence that followed felt heavy, like something pressing down from above. My dad sat back down slowly, his movements careful. He did not look at the lake again. He stared at the fire until it burned itself into embers. I fell asleep at some point, more from exhaustion than calm. My dreams were thin and broken. I woke often listening. The lake stayed quiet. At dawn, the adults moved fast. There was no slow waking, no stretching, no talk about fishing before breakfast. Gear went into bags. The tent came down. Food stayed packed. The fire pit was covered and left cold. I remember the light of early morning making everything look pale and ordinary, like the night had never happened. We left without eating. The drive out felt longer than the drive in. No one spoke much. I watched the trees pass and tried to make sense of the sound, fitting it into shapes that did not quite hold. As I got older, the memory stayed. It sharpened as other things faded. I learned about animals and the noises they make. I heard foxes scream in the night, their calls tearing and wild. I heard recordings of mountain lions, the way their cries can sound like something human and not at the same time. I learned how sound carries over water, how it flattens distance and bends direction, how a noise from far away can feel close and personal. None of that erased the memory. It only gave it edges. 30 years later, I asked my dad about it once. We were sitting in his kitchen, daylight on the table, a normal afternoon. I brought it up casually, the way you do when you're not sure what you'll find. I told him what I remembered, the scream, the flashlight, the way we left. He did not laugh. He did not tell me I imagined it. He listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on a spot that was not the room we were in. When I finished, he told me never to camp there again. He did not explain why. He changed the subject and did not return to it. Over time, I put the rest together on my own. The lake sat in a basin that funneled sound. The far shore rose steep and wooded, perfect for throwing noise back across the water. A large animal, injured or cornered, could have made that sound. A mountain lion protecting a kill. A fox caught wrong. Even a person, yelling across the lake in the night. Their voice twisted by distance and water until it lost all familiar shape. What stayed with my dad was not the sound itself. It was his reaction to it. He dropped the flashlight and let it go because light would not help. Light would only show how far the dark reached. He packed us out at dawn because whatever made that sound had claimed the night, and he did not want to test what came next. He never told me exactly what he thought it was. He did not need to. His silence carried more weight than an explanation. Some places hold sounds that do not belong to the day. Some memories stay because they are tied to fear that kept you safe. I never camped there again. I never needed to. The lake stayed where it was, and so did the sound, wading across the water, sharp and unforgettable. I went camping alone because I wanted space and because it was cheaper than anything else I could afford at the time. I had taken a few days off work without a real plan and decided to drive until the road felt quiet enough. That is how I ended up on a long stretch of forest road with no signs, no cell service, and no other cars. The kind of place people do not stumble into by accident. It was late afternoon when I finally pulled off the road into a clearing. The clearing looked old, not official. Grass had grown uneven, and the dirt was packed hard like tires had turned there years ago and then stopped. Trees surrounded it on all sides, tall and close, blocking the sky except for a thin strip of light overhead. I shut off the engine and listened. No wind, no birds, just the engine ticking as it cooled. I sat there longer than I needed to, watching the tree line, waiting for that feeling that tells you to leave. It did not come, so I stayed. I told myself that was confidence. I set up my tent near the edge of the clearing where the ground was flattest. The soil was dry but firm, easy for stakes. As I worked, I noticed old fire scars in the dirt, blackened patches half buried under leaves. More than one, spread out, not centered like a normal campsite. That bothered me enough to pause, but I kept going. People camp wherever they want in places like this. I had done it myself. By the time I finished setting up, the sun was low. Light filtered through the trees in long, thin lines. The forest smelled damp, even though the ground was dry. I ate from a can and drank water straight from the bottle, keeping my headlamp off to save battery. The quiet felt heavy, like the woods were waiting for night to finish settling in. When it got dark, it happened fast. One moment I could still see shapes, the next everything flattened into black. I zipped the tent and lay back, listening. Small sounds carried far. A branch snapped somewhere deeper in the trees. I waited for it to repeat. It didn't. Sleep came in short pieces. I kept waking for no clear reason. Each time I opened my eyes, the dark felt closer, like it had moved while I wasn't looking. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. They were not close at first, just faint pressure sounds, leaves compressing, then releasing. Slow, heavy, not rushed. They came from a tree line on the far side of the clearing and moved along the edge, never crossing into the open space. I held my breath without thinking. The steps stopped. After a few seconds, they started again. Same pace, same weight. Whoever or whatever it was stayed just beyond the reach of where I could see, even if I had turned on the light. It circled the clearing once, then twice. Each time it passed my tent, it slowed. I stayed still. I told myself animals do this. Deer, elk, even bears. But animals do not walk like that. They hesitate. They change rhythm. This did not. At some point, the steps stopped directly behind my tent. I could feel the ground shift slightly, like weight settling in place. No breathing, no smell, just presence. My heart beat so hard it made my ears ring. I waited for fabric to brush, for the zipper to move, for anything that would turn fear into action. Nothing happened. After what felt like a long time, the pressure lifted. The steps moved away, heading back toward the trees. They did not fade into the distance. They stopped just past the tree line and stayed there. I did not sleep again. When morning came, the clearing looked normal, almost peaceful. Sunlight cut through the trees, lighting patches of ground like nothing had happened. I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped out. The ground around the clearing showed prints. Not clear enough to identify, but deep enough to see where something heavy had walked. They stayed near the tree line, exactly where I heard the steps. None crossed into the clearing. None came close to the tent. They formed a loose circle and then disappeared where the soil turned rocky. I packed quickly. I did not eat. I did not explore. I loaded the car and started driving back the way I came. About 10 minutes down the road, I saw something that made my hands tighten on the wheel. There was another clearing, almost identical to the one I'd stayed in. Same size, same shape, same fire scars scattered across the ground. No tent, no car, just empty space surrounded by trees. A mile later, there was another one, and another. Each clearing looked slightly older than the last, like a trail of places where people had stopped and then not stayed long. It dawned on me that I had not chosen a random spot. I had followed a pattern without realizing it. Later, after I got home, I looked up the area. No campground listings, no hiking trails, just a stretch of forest that locals avoided without explaining why. Old hunting land, old logging routes, places people used to go and then stopped using. What stayed with me was not the footsteps. It was the restraint. Whatever walked that clearing did not rush. It did not approach. It stayed just far enough to be felt, but not seen, like it was deciding something. I still camp, but never like that again. I choose places with rules and signs and other people nearby. I do not trust quiet that feels organized. Some places are empty because they want to be. I went camping because I wanted to disappear for a few days without actually going anywhere far. Work had been grinding me down in small ways that added up, and being around people felt louder than usual. I picked a state forest a few hours from home, the kind with open backcountry camping and long gravel roads that cut through miles of trees. I chose it because it was empty on the map and because nobody I knew had ever mentioned it. I arrived in the late afternoon. The sky was clear, pale blue, with thin clouds stretched out like scratches. The forest road narrowed the farther I drove, and the trees leaned in close enough that branches brushed the sides of my car. I did not see another vehicle after the first 20 minutes. There was no cell service, which I expected. That was part of the reason I came. I found a pull-off that looked barely used, just a break in the brush where the ground dipped and flattened. Old tire marks were faint but still there, softened by time and rain. I parked, shut off the engine, and listened. No wind, no voices, just the distant sound of something tapping in the trees, maybe a branch moving. I carry my gear a short distance from the road, far enough that I could not see the car once I turn around. The clearing I chose was small, ringed by trees on all sides. The ground was uneven, but workable. As I cleared away sticks, I noticed pieces of old trash half buried in the dirt. Rusted metal, a melted bottle cap, signs that people had been there before, but not recently. It gave the place a used feeling, like it was forgotten rather than untouched. I set up my tent and hung my food from a low branch, more out of habit than fear. The forest stayed quiet as the light dropped. When the sun finally slipped behind the trees, the temperature fell fast. I cooked a simple meal and ate standing up, watching the shadows lengthen. The darkness came in thick layers, filling space instead of just covering it. I put out my fire carefully and crawled into the tent. The fabric felt thin. Every sound carried. Leaves shifting, something small moving through brush. Normal noises, but louder than I was used to. I lay on my back and stared up at the dark ceiling, letting my breathing slow. Sometime after midnight, I woke up because something felt wrong. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of the normal ones. The forest had gone quiet in a way that felt deliberate. I stayed still and listened. Then I heard movement. It came from the direction of the road. Slow footsteps, spaced evenly, moving through the trees toward my clearing. They were careful, placed to avoid snapping branches. Whoever it was knew how to move in the dark. My stomach tightened. I told myself it could be another camper, someone who saw my car earlier and decided to follow. That explanation did not make me feel better. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. I could tell by the way the ground sound changed. No closer, no retreat, just stopped. I held my breath. After a long moment, the steps started again, circling the clearing just inside the tree line. They did not rush. They did not wander. The path was controlled, almost measured. When I shifted slightly inside the tent, the footsteps stopped. When I stayed still, they continued. I realized then that whoever was knew exactly where I was. The circling continued for what felt like a long time. Long enough that my legs cramped from staying still. Long enough that my mouth went dry. The steps never crossed into the open space. They stayed just out of sight, hidden by trees and darkness. At one point, the footsteps stopped directly behind my tent. I could feel the weight through the ground, the slight compression of soil. I expected to hear breathing or fabric brushing the tent. I heard nothing. The stillness pressed down on me, thick and heavy. Then the pressure lifted. The steps moved away, back toward the road. They faded slowly, not rushed, until they were gone. I did not sleep again. When morning came, the forest looked harmless. Sunlight filtered through the leaves. Birds returned. The quiet of the night felt unreal in daylight. I stepped out of the tent and checked the ground. There were footprints. They were not clear enough to show tread, but deep enough to tell they came from boots. They followed the exact path I heard the night before, circling the clearing just inside the trees. They stopped behind my tent. There were no prints closer than that. No signs of hesitation. No wandering. What bothered me most was how they ended. The footprints led back toward the road and then vanished where the ground turned rocky, like the person stepped carefully to avoid leaving more signs. I packed up fast. I did not eat. I did not sit down. I kept scanning the trees while I worked, expecting movement. Nothing happened. On the drive out, I noticed more pull-offs like the one I had used. Small clearings just off the road, each with faint signs of past camps. Some had fire scars. Some had trash buried shallow. All of them felt abandoned, not because nobody knew about them, but because people stopped using them for a reason. Once I reached pavement and signal returned, the tension in my chest finally eased. Later that day, I looked up reports about the area. Nothing dramatic. No stories of attacks or missing campers. Just occasional mentions of people finding their camps disturbed. Food moved, gear rearranged. No theft, no confrontation. That was the part that stayed with me. Whoever walked around my camp did not want my things. They did not want to scare me into running. They wanted to be close without being seen. They wanted control of the space without forcing it. I realized that night was not about chance. Someone knew those roads. Someone watched who came in and chose when to move. They stayed just far enough away to remain hidden, just close enough to be felt. I still camp, but I no longer choose random spots off empty roads. I no longer trust silence that feels planned. Some places are quiet because nobody goes there. Others are quiet because someone already is.